The March wind had a knife's edge to it that afternoon, cutting through London's streets and sending newspapers skittering like frightened birds along the curb when a messenger pushed open the door of 221B Baker Street and asked for Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Holmes took the envelope with his usual absent-minded air, but I noticed at once the quality of the paper. Thick, cream-colored, and expensive, and the bold, angular handwriting across the front. He slid it open with a practiced flick of his knife, scanned the contents twice, and then handed it over to me without comment. It was from a man of whom I had heard vague mention in financial circles, Mr. Alastair Pennington, late of the Bengal Civil Service, now retired to London and known for his collection of oddities and curiosities from all corners of the empire. His message was brief, but its import was unmistakable. Mr. Holmes, a map has come into my possession whose very existence defies reason. It shows roads that do not exist, stations that were never built, and marks a destination that cannot be reached. My attempts to follow it have ended only in disaster, and last night a man was found dead where the map insisted a street would be. I beg you to come at once. I fear for my life. Alastair Pennington, 17 Wrexham Crescent. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his long, thin fingers steepled beneath his chin, and allowed the faintest smile to touch his lips. A map with no destination, Watson. At least, no destination that our correspondent has been able to discover. It is rare that geography itself becomes an accomplice to crime. This promises to be instructive. Before I continue with this remarkable case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support allows us to keep bringing these mysteries to you. Now, let us proceed. We arrived at Wrexham Crescent shortly after 6 o'clock, the late afternoon light already beginning to fail, and the city settling into its evening rhythm. Pennington's house was an orderly, respectable residence in a quiet West London street, with polished brass on the door and curtains of tasteful restraint. The man who greeted us, however, was anything but composed. Alastair Pennington was perhaps 55, his hair silvered at the temples, his build still vigorous despite a slight stoop at the shoulders. His face, tanned by colonial sun and lined by years of bureaucratic labor, now showed signs of acute anxiety. His eyes darted to the street behind us before he closed the door, as if expecting someone, or something, to emerge from the gathering dusk.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming. I had begun to think you would not believe me.
Holmes shrugged off his coat and glanced around the hall, taking in the umbrella stand, the framed engravings, the faint smell of pipe tobacco and old leather that hung in the air.
The world is full of things people find unbelievable, Mr. Pennington, he said. Most of them turn out to be merely unusual when properly examined. Let us begin with the map. Pennington led us to his study, a room lined with bookshelves and curiosities that told the story of his years abroad. Brass instruments, carved figures, a small elephant's tusk, and glass cases containing pinned butterflies all jostled for space. But it was the large table in the center of the room, currently cleared of everything save one sheet of folded paper, that drew Holmes's attention at once. Pennington lifted the paper with something like reluctance, as if half afraid it might bite. He unfolded it carefully and smoothed it out on the table. It was, at first glance, a map of London. The style was precise and modern, with clear, finely ruled lines and labels written in a neat, architectural hand. Major thoroughfares were marked, as were familiar landmarks: the Thames, the bridges, certain railway termini, parks and squares. So far, nothing unusual. But as my eye traveled across its surface, unease began to creep into my mind. Some streets were unfamiliar, crescents and lanes with names I did not recognize in districts I thought I knew well. Stations were marked along railway lines that I knew to be devoid of stops. In the east, a street was labeled Harold's Way, where no such thoroughfare existed. In the west, a cul-de-sac called Rookery Close appeared, though I had never heard the name. Most disturbing of all, toward the bottom right corner, near a bend in the Thames that I could not quite place, was a small red cross with a single word beside it. Home. Holmes bent over the map like a hawk sighting prey. His eyes ran along the lines, his head tilting slightly as he followed the train routes and river curves, checking them against his prodigious knowledge of London's geography. "Curious," he murmured. "Some of these features exist in reality. Others do not. The map is neither accurate nor wholly fanciful. It is an intermediate creature, Watson, a chimera of fact and invention." Pennington pulled the decanter and 3 glasses from a nearby cabinet, his hand shaking so badly that some of the liquid sloshed over the rim. He forced himself to sit, fingers worrying the edge of his chair. "Tell us how it came into your possession," Holmes said, still studying the map. "It arrived 3 weeks ago," Pennington said, "in an envelope with no return address, no note, nothing. Just the map, folded as you see it now, addressed to me by name. At first I thought it was some sort of elaborate joke, an idle fancy from one of my acquaintances. But then I noticed the crossings." He pointed to several small red marks on the map, besides the one labeled Home. Each cross had a date written in tiny script beside it. "This one," he said, "is on a corner near Limehouse. It is marked 18th October. That was the date a fire broke out in a riverside warehouse there, destroying half a block. This one, near Fenchurch Street,
is marked 21st October, the day a man was struck and killed in what the papers called a freak accident with a delivery wagon. This one, just north of King's Cross, is labeled 23rd October, the night a building collapsed due to subsidence, killing a family in their beds. Each event occurred exactly where the crosses indicated, on the dates written beside them." Holmes's expression sharpened. "You confirmed these locations personally?" "I did. At first I thought it might be coincidence. London is a great city. Accidents happen every day. But the dates matched, the locations matched. And then, 4 nights ago, I noticed a new cross that had not been there when I first examined the map. Here." He pointed to a small cross in a district I recognized as lying somewhere between Paddington and Notting Hill. The word "Today" was written beside it in that same precise hand. Pennington swallowed. "Curiosity and dread battled within me," he said. "You may call me a fool, Mr. Holmes, but in the end, I went. I hired a cab, gave the driver the nearest real street I could identify, and then attempted to follow the map on foot to where the cross lay. But when I arrived, I found nothing. No street with the name the map gave. No house matching its indications. Just a row of old buildings, a vacant lot, and an empty mews." "And the man who died?" Holmes prompted. Pennington's throat worked. "I did not stay long. I returned home, trying to convince myself I had become the victim of some elaborate hoax. The next morning, however, the papers carried the story. A man found dead in that very mews. No identification. The doctors said his heart had stopped suddenly. No sign of violence." Holmes's eyes glittered. "And what connects these events to you, Mr. Pennington? Why send you this map of all people?" "I do not know," Pennington said. "Unless unless it is punishment. Years ago in Calcutta, I made a decision that cost another man his life. The matter was hushed up, but I have never forgotten it. Perhaps, Holmes cut him off with an impatient gesture, we can explore your conscience later if needed. For the moment, we deal with facts. Since that night, has the map changed again?
Yes, Pennington whispered. Yesterday morning, another cross appeared. Here, near the river in Southwark. It is marked with tomorrow's date, and beneath it, for the first time, there is a word other than home. It says pen. For Pennington, I said involuntarily. Just so, Holmes said. It seems, Mr. Pennington, that whoever sends these marks has decided your involvement is to become more direct. But how are the new marks appearing? Pennington demanded. I keep the map in a locked drawer in this very room. No one has a key but me. Yet each morning I find some new horror branded upon it. Holmes straightened, his decision made. We shall find out, he said. Tonight, Watson, we remain here as guests of Mr. Pennington. We shall keep our own watch over this map and see whether it chooses to write tomorrow's fate in our presence. We settled in as the lamps were lit and time marched toward midnight. Holmes commandeered a chair by the map table, his eyes resting alternately on the paper and on the window, where the city's lamps glowed faintly through the rain-streaked glass. I occupied a position that allowed me to see both him and the study door. Pennington hovered for a time, then excused himself, claiming fatigue. Holmes insisted the map remain on the table, in full view. Do you suspect him? I asked once we were alone. I suspect everyone until they are ruled out, Holmes replied. But in his case, I suspect guilt of another sort. He carries something heavy, that much is clear. Whether it relates to this map remains to be seen. The house gradually fell silent. The clock on the mantel chimed 11, then past. The rain eased, then began again. We sat in that peculiar companionship born of long vigils in dangerous work, saying little, but sharing awareness of every creak and sigh of the old house. At 5 minutes to midnight, Holmes's posture changed. He leaned forward, every line of him sharpening. Watch closely, Watson, he murmured. The map is our patient tonight. We shall see whether its symptoms present themselves openly. The mantel clock began to strike 12. On the first chime, I saw it. The faintest flicker of movement across the surface of the map. It was as if an invisible pen had brushed the paper. A pale line appeared where none had been before, sketching itself into existence with eerie delicacy. With each chime, another stroke emerged, forming slowly into a tiny cross near the lower edge of the map, close to the existing mark for tomorrow. By the time the 12th chime faded, the cross was complete. Beside it, in the same precise hand as the previous markings, a single word formed itself letter by letter. Bridge. I could not help an involuntary exclamation. Holmes! No hand touched it, yet the ink... But there is no ink, only... Graphite, Holmes said, already moving. He bent over the map, his magnifying lens in one hand. Yes, the marks are in pencil, not ink, though the pressure is such that the lines appear quite dark. The graphite is fresh, and yet, as you observed, no visible hand wrote these words. Then how? He held up a finger. We shall return to the how presently. For now, observe the what. Yesterday's new cross bore the letters pen. Tonight's bears the word bridge. Put them together, and we have Penbridge, which I take to be an allusion to our host's name, Pennington, and to some specific bridge or to a place called Pembridge. There is no such district in London, but there is a village of that name in Surrey, if memory serves. However, given that our map is of London, I favour the interpretation of Pennington and Bridge.
For what purpose?
I asked. To lure our host to a particular location, no doubt. A trap, Watson.
But for whom? The sender or the sent? That is the question.
For now, we wake Mr. Pennington. Pennington's reaction to the new markings was predictable. He went white as marble, his hands gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles showed pale against the wood.
"It knows," he whispered. "It knows what I did."
Holmes fixed him with that piercing gaze that had undone so many suspects and witnesses over the years. "What you did where, Mr. Pennington? At a bridge?" Pennington sank into the chair as if his legs would no longer support him.
"Yes," he said dully. "The Kalyan Bridge, in India, 20 years ago. I signed an order to delay maintenance, despite warnings of structural weakness. It saved the company money in the short term. A month later, the bridge collapsed under a train. 43 dead. I told myself it was an act of God, but it was my signature on the refusal." Holmes listened without visible sympathy, but neither did he show the moral outrage I felt rising in my own breast. "And who else knew of this?" Holmes asked. "A handful of engineers, the governor, a clerk in the Public Works Office. People who have scattered since, some dead, some retired. One man, the clerk, named Martin Hayes, threatened to expose me at the time. I arranged for him to be transferred to a remote district. I heard later he had died of fever. Edwin Harrow, an MP, took up the cause in Parliament briefly, but it faded from the papers. I hoped it would be forgotten." "And now someone has reminded you," Holmes said. "But not merely of that. They have tied your guilt to a series of deaths in London, mapped in advance. This suggests not mere revenge for an old sin, but an ongoing pattern of crime." He turned back to the map. "These crosses are not accidents, Watson. They mark deliberate acts cleverly disguised as misfortune. A warehouse fire, a wagon accident, a building collapse. Each could be engineered with sufficient knowledge and ruthlessness." Our unseen cartographer is not merely a prophet, but a planner. "Then the next mark, tomorrow, could be another death," I said. "Perhaps intended for Mr. Pennington himself." "Indeed," Holmes said, "which is why we shall not wait passively for it. We shall go to the location indicated and see who else is drawn there by this inkless hand." The following day was one of the most curious of my acquaintance with Holmes. From early morning, he immersed himself in the map, first transferring its contents to a fresh sheet on our own table back at Baker Street. He recreated the master lines of London, Thames, major roads, railway lines, then overlaid the false streets, impossible stations, and illusory cul-de-sacs. He studied the relations between genuine and invented geography with the same intensity he once devoted to cigarette ash and boot prints. "What do you see?" I asked at last. "A pattern masquerading as chaos," he said. "Note how the invented streets never stand entirely alone, Watson. Each is anchored at one or both ends to a real street, a real landmark. The fictional elements are grafted onto reality, like contrived rumors appended to genuine facts. It makes the whole more believable. Now look here. This non-existent lane connects two rail termini in a straight line that real roads do not follow. This phantom station sits precisely midway between two real ones,
at a junction that a railway company might have considered, then rejected. Whoever drew this map understands how planners and engineers think. You believe the creator is an engineer, I said. A civil engineer, or someone close to that world. Perhaps a surveyor, perhaps a clerk in a planning office. Someone who has seen drafts of what might have been, maps of possible roads and stations that were never built, and has repurposed that knowledge to create this hybrid. And the red home? I pointed to that enigmatic mark. Ah, yes, Holmes said softly. The most intriguing element.
The cartographer's self-portrait, perhaps. Always there, in the same place, while other marks appear and vanish. The map's true destination, even if it claims to have none. At 11 o'clock that night, we found ourselves in Southwark, near the river, following Holmes as he navigated a path that seemed half rooted in the streets beneath our feet and half in the false geography of the enchanted map. He carried a copy of the relevant quarter in his pocket, occasionally checking our position by gaslight. The cross marked for that day lay at the intersection of a narrow alley and a derelict dockyard, according to the map. In reality, we found an old warehouse backing onto a stretch of river wall, with a rotting wooden wharf jutting into the black water. A single gas lamp flickered at the corner, casting sickly light over puddles of filthy rain. "We are early," Holmes said, checking his watch. "The previous deaths occurred between 10 and midnight. Our man, if he comes, will want darkness but not complete invisibility. He needs to see to arrange his accidents. We shall wait in that doorway." We sheltered in a recessed entrance, our collars turned up against the wind. After perhaps 20 minutes, footsteps approached along the alley. A man emerged into the circle of lamplight, a figure in a dark coat and hat, carrying what appeared to be a valise. He looked around quickly, then moved toward the warehouse's side door. Holmes's hand gripped my arm. "Recognize him, Watson?" I peered through the gloom. The man's features were partially obscured, but his movements carried a familiar nervous energy. "No," I said. "You saw him once, in a different context. Try again." When the figure turned to check the street behind him, the light caught his face full on for a moment. I gasped. "Pennington!" "Or someone wearing his features on purpose," Holmes murmured. "Come." We moved quickly and silently, the years of Holmes's practice in shadowing suspects lending confidence to our tread. We reached the warehouse door just as the man was pulling a key from his pocket. Holmes laid a hand on his shoulder. "Good evening, Mr. Pennington," he said softly. "Or should I call you Mr. Hayes?" The man froze, then slowly turned. Under the hat, the face was indeed Pennington's, or near enough to fool a casual observer. But closer inspection revealed differences. The jawline more angular, the eyes harder, the hairline slightly different. "My name," the man said, "is Martin Hayes." Pennington had mentioned the name. The clerk in India who knew about the bridge decision, the man he had believed dead of fever. Holmes smiled in a way that was not at all reassuring. "Alive and well, it seems, and possessed of both a fine sense of geography and a taste for theatrical vengeance. You've led us quite a chase, Mr. Hayes. The map was a clever touch." Hayes attempted to pull away, but Holmes's fingers tightened. For a moment his eyes darted to the river, calculating the distance, then dismissed it. He sagged slightly. "How did you know?" he asked. "From the start you overplayed your knowledge," Holmes said. "You knew not only where Pennington had sinned, but how. You knew the details of the Kalyan Bridge contract, its cost, its timetable. That knowledge limited the pool of possible avengers.
When our client mentioned a clerk named Hayes, who had threatened to expose him, I made inquiries. I found a report of Hayes's death that was surprisingly thin on details and coincided with a transfer to a district where records were notoriously poor. Meanwhile, in London, I discovered a civil engineer's clerk named Martin Hayford, Holmes stressed the change, working in the railway plans office. The face, when I saw it from across a street, was that of a man haunted. That led me to consider that Hayes had not died at all, but reinvented himself here, living quietly while nursing a very old, very focused hatred. Hayes's lips twisted into something like a smile.
"You're right about the hatred," he said. "But you're wrong if you think it was focused only on Pennington. He was the start. The others, they were like him. Men who signed papers that killed people far away and then dined in London clubs as if nothing had happened." He looked past us toward the river. "You ever seen a carriage of bodies, Mr. Holmes? They loaded them in like sacks of grain. The passengers who died when that bridge went down, they wrapped them in sheets and stacked them on flat cars. I saw children's feet sticking out. The engineers tried to blame the monsoon. The directors blamed native errors. But the paper trail led straight to one signature: A. Pennington. I thought if I lived long enough, I'd make him see their faces again, every one of them." "And the others?" Holmes asked. "The warehouse fire, the wagon accident, the building collapse. Were they also your justice?" Hayes's gaze hardened. "They were experiments, tests. I had access to plans for the city, drainage maps, building assessments, railway maintenance reports. It's a simple matter to weaken a support here, to overload a line there, to pay a menial to stack crates in such a way that a spark will do the rest. Each event was designed to prove a point, that men like Pennington sit on top of a fragile world and that fragility can be mapped." "The map," I said. Hayes nodded. "I spent years drawing maps for other men, plans of future lines, future bridges, future cuts through the city. They would mark what to build. I decided to mark what to break. Every red cross on that paper is a place where London shows its seams. I chose places where a natural accident would be blamed, old buildings, neglected warehouses. No one looks deeper, no one questions, until now." "And the word home?" Holmes asked. "Your anchor point. Is that where we would find you if we followed the fiction as well as the fact?" Hayes's eyes flickered with something like wry admiration. "Of course." I couldn't resist leaving a signature. The cartographer's conceit. A map, after all, is nothing without its maker. Home is the room where I drew every line. A boarding house in Lambeth, 3rd floor. You'd have found more maps there, copies, plans. The next, crosses. "And pen and bridge?" I asked, unable to keep silent. "Why tell your victim what you were doing?" "Because it wasn't just about killing him," Hayes said quietly. "If it had been, I could have pushed him under a cab weeks ago. It was about making him walk through a city full of invisible consequences. I wanted him to see how it felt to follow a line on paper and not know until it was too late where it truly led." Holmes's voice, when he replied, held no sympathy. "And what of the people who died in your experiments? The warehouse worker, the man in the street, the family in the collapsed house. Were they lines on a map to you as well?" Hayes looked away. "They were proof that the system was rotten, that it could be made to fail with the slightest pressure in the right place. They were necessary." "Spoken like every man who ever justified murder," Holmes said. At that moment, Inspector Lestrade stepped from the shadows at the end of the alley with 2 constables at his back. Holmes had sent him a message earlier, requesting his presence near the dockyard that night. Hayes saw the uniforms and made no attempt to run. His shoulders sagged. "Well,"
he said simply. "I suppose we've reached the end of the map." The trial of Martin Hayes, also known as Hayford, was unusual in that it required the court to consider whether deaths that appeared to be accidents were, in fact, premeditated murders. Holmes's testimony regarding the map, the mechanical techniques involved in causing the accidents, and Hayes's confessed motives formed the backbone of the Crown's case. The jury needed little time to find him guilty on multiple counts of murder and conspiracy.
Hayes maintained to the end that he was merely balancing the ledger, that men like Pennington had killed dozens with strokes of a pen and never faced consequences, while he had simply shifted the deaths to a different place, a different time, in order to make the invisible visible. The law, unswayed by his peculiar ethics, sentenced him to death. As for Pennington, he did not die that night by the docks, but his life, in a sense, ended in another way. Holmes insisted that he face the full story of what Hayes had done and why. The man was confronted not only with his own signature on the Callion Bridge contract, but with the testimony of engineers and witnesses that Holmes had gathered. He learned, for the first time in detail, how many people had died, and how his attempt to bury his guilt had helped create the very monster who nearly killed him years later in another country. Pennington left London within the month, resigning from his clubs, selling his house, and retreating to a small property in the north. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he lived out his days in quiet isolation, rarely seen in public, occasionally writing letters to the families of those who had died in the bridge collapse, enclosing money where he could. Whether this represented genuine repentance or simply another form of self-protection, I cannot say. The map itself sits now in a drawer at Baker Street, wrapped in brown paper. Holmes kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. "It is a curious thing, Watson," he said to me one evening as he unwrapped it for the first time since the trial. "The city we live in is layered with plans, maps of what is, maps of what might be, maps of what never was. Most men only ever see the top layer, the streets beneath their feet. Hayes saw all the layers at once. He saw the gaps between intentions and reality, and he weaponized them. In another life, with another temperament, he might have been a great engineer or city planner. Instead, He became a murderer who thought in lines and distances rather than in blood. He traced a finger along one of the invented streets. This map has no destination in the sense that its maker never intended anyone to arrive safely. But in another sense, it leads somewhere very specific, into the mind of a man who decided that the only way to punish unseen crimes was to make new ones visible. It is a warning, perhaps, that we should be careful what we bury under paperwork and distance. The consequences may walk back to us one day along roads we thought no one could see. I have often reflected on that observation. The map with no destination case taught me that not all murderers are driven by immediate passion or obvious greed. Some are created slowly, line by line, by systems that treat certain lives as negligible, certain deaths as acceptable collateral. Hayes's logic was twisted, his actions unforgivable, but he forced us to confront the fact that men like Pennington did indeed kill from a distance without ever leaving their comfortable rooms. Holmes, for his part, took no satisfaction in Hayes's execution. Justice, he said, has been served according to the law, but justice in a broader sense remains incomplete as long as men can sign away safety for profit and sleep peacefully thereafter. Hayes tried to redraw the map of responsibility. He failed. The question is whether anyone else will learn from the attempt without following his path. The map remains in that drawer, a folded piece of paper that contains both a city and a confession. It has, quite properly, no destination. But the story it tells, of guilt, revenge, and the terrible ingenuity of the human mind, has a point more sharp than any compass, and a reach that extends far beyond the streets of London it so deceptively portrays.